Goldie Hawn never dreamed of becoming a movie star. From the very beginning, she sensed that the world of Hollywood, especially in Los Angeles, was somehow off. The glamour, the fake smiles, and the calculated relationships made her feel alienated. She didn't want to be a part of it. Known for her radiant looks and infectious laughter, Goldie always shone brightly on screen. But behind the spotlight, there were times when she reached her limit. At 79 years old, after decades in the entertainment industry, Goldie Hawn spoke out for the first time about 6 colleagues who drained her the most on set. Are you curious about those names? If yes, leave the number 1 in the comments. If not, comment 0 to let me know. Don't forget to enjoy the video and hit subscribe to support me so I can bring you more interesting stories. She no longer stayed silent, and one of the most surprising names was Kirk Douglas. Unlike loud names like Bill Murray or Sean Penn, who can easily be labeled as rebellious or cold, Kirk Douglas is a legendary icon of a golden era, a man admired by generations as the epitome of classic masculinity in American cinema. To Goldie, he wasn't a villain, but he wasn't a hero either. He is a reflection of a sad truth that even legends can embody a subtle yet heavy disregard for women. Goldie Hawn has always respected those who came before her. She has never forgotten that her success was built upon the foundation laid by previous generations. But over time, she realized that some people never saw her as a companion, only as an ornament on the scaffold of past glory. Douglas never openly insulted her, and she never criticized him publicly. That's not how Goldie behaves. But in private conversations, a different picture gradually emerged, a suffocatingly sweet patronage. At countless entertainment industry events, Douglas often approached her with old-fashioned, gentlemanly gestures, lengthy hand kisses, flowery greetings, and winking eyes like he was acting in a black-and-white film from the 1950s. Outsiders saw it as charm, but Goldie just gave polite smiles. Yet inside, she felt hurt. He talks to me as if I'm still the girl in the bikini on set back then, but I've won an Oscar, she once confided to a close friend. There was no big explosion, no major scandal, just moments of being interrupted during panels meetings where her opinions were overlooked or simply ignored. The scripts she invested time and effort into developing were ultimately praised with glowing words for the male filmmakers, while she was referred to as the always radiant Goldie. Once after an award ceremony, when Douglas used his usual sweet yet patronizing words, she simply replied softly, "You may be the first name called on the crew list, but you can still feel like a decoration." Many might argue that it's just a generational difference. But for Goldie, it was a sign of a deeper illness, the diminishing of women's intellect and voice in the entertainment industry, replaced by superficial compliments and outdated politeness. She didn't hate him, but what hurt her most was the unspoken message, "You don't belong to this club. You're just a doll in a glass case." And Goldie, with calmness and dignity, gradually drew clear boundaries. Once during a project development meeting for a film she co-produced, Douglas unexpectedly showed up. As Goldie was sharing her insightful views on the emotional core of the script, he interrupted with a joke, "Goldie sure knows how to sell emotion." Everyone laughed. Goldie didn't. She closed her notebook and said, "I've said enough," then walked out of the room. No anger, just an ending. Goldie still speaks well of Michael Douglas, her son, who embodies a modern spirit of collaboration and a listening attitude. Michael knows how to listen. He's not just waiting for his turn to speak, she once said. But about Kirk, she has never spoken with the same warmth. In an interview in the 2010s, when asked about the legends she had worked with, she deliberately left out his name, not because she forgot, but by choice. There are men who don't deserve a comeback in your memories, she shared with a friend. They once had the spotlight. I don't need to shine a light on them anymore. If Chevy Chase is on Goldie's personal blacklist for chaos and carelessness, then Warren Beatty is a completely different case, dangerously charming. In the 1970s, Warren Beatty was a Hollywood icon. His looks, fame, and power all combined to create a living legend. He was not just an actor, but someone who could shape the destinies of others in the industry. At first, Goldie felt honored to have his attention. Lunch and dinner invitations, sweet stories, charming smiles, all carefully calculated. But Goldie wasn't an innocent young girl waiting to be rescued. She knew well about Beatty's romantic history, the famous women who had once passed through his life, only to become anecdotes in his stories. She politely but firmly declined him. No drama, no fuss. Just a smile and a gentle refusal. But that was something Warren Beatty wasn't used to. After multiple rejections, Beatty's charm began to crack. What was once attentive turned cold. She was absent from parties. Invitations stopped coming. Then rumors started to spread. Goldie was difficult to work with, not serious enough for heavy roles, too sweet for critically acclaimed films. It wasn't a knockout blow, but a silent leak, draining opportunities without leaving a trace. Meetings got canceled. Scripts suddenly disappeared. Her presence in high-quality projects gradually dwindled. And it all began with a simple no. Goldie Hawn didn't get angry, didn't fight back with scandal, and didn't use these stories for sensational headlines. She chose to tell them calmly and honestly, like a seasoned woman who has walked through darkness without letting it consume her. She didn't just survive the old Hollywood, she overcame it and left her own mark. It wasn't a knockout blow nor a scandalous explosion. What Goldie Hawn experienced was a form of slow leak, a quiet but no less dangerous damage that gradually drained opportunities while maintaining a calm facade. Industry insiders later called it the art of sabotage in its most basic Hollywood form. Not public humiliation, but vague hints repeated at just the right place and time, perfectly sowing doubt. A producer recalled being bluntly told Goldie is a problem, but later everyone saw clearly the only baggage she carried was Warren Beatty's bruised ego. Goldie never publicly detailed what happened. When asked if she would want to work with Beatty again in the future, she simply replied, "I don't mix business with power games." Just one sentence enough to make her stance clear. But in private conversations, she was more straightforward. According to close friends, Goldie once described Beatty as someone who couldn't accept rejection, and instead of dialogue, he punished it. That punishment was not loud or violent, but sharp as a scalpel through relationships, casual remarks behind the scenes, and subtle boycotts in an industry where perception holds power. Unlike many who choose to retaliate or engage in rumors, Goldie chose silence. She maintained her professionalism, focused on her work, and refused to be dragged into the emotional quagmire. Within her inner circle, the name Beatty was rarely mentioned. Or if it was only through headshakes, sighs, or a curt remark. That didn't happen. There was no resentment. just a firm resolve. Goldie made her decision and never looked back. Years later, Goldie continued to succeed on her own path without Beatty and without needing his approval. But Hollywood is small and fate can be cruel. At a grand award ceremony later, they crossed paths. Beatty, still the same performer, approached with his familiar smile as if nothing had ever happened. Goldie also smiled gently, elegantly, and as cold as a winter wind. Not a word. She turned and walked away. A journalist standing nearby whispered, "That smile could freeze hell." That brief moment, silent yet perfect, was Goldie's final word. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to write a rebuttal, didn't need a harsh accusation. Goldie simply outlived the old stories and lived better. While Warren Beatty's legacy grew increasingly tangled in speculation, ego, and broken relationships, Goldie's image remained steadfast, defined by resilience, elegance, and the ability to refuse to play by others' rules. In 1978, the film Foul Play was released, introducing a screen couple that captivated audiences, the charming Goldie Hawn and the witty Chevy Chase. Their chemistry brought laughter, seemingly the perfect pairing. But behind the camera, the reality was far different. According to accounts from many members of the film crew, the filming process was a series of tense, emotional, and conflict-filled days, most of which revolved around one name, Chevy Chase. At the time, Chevy Chase had just emerged from the spotlight of Saturday Night Live, where his image, arrogant and sarcastic, had begun to overshadow his comedic talent. On the set of Foul Play, that ego was on full display and had a serious impact. Some crew members described him as unpredictable, sometimes friendly, sometimes irritable and dismissive of others. Director Colin Higgins, known for his calm yet decisive style, gradually found himself overshadowed by Chase's whims. Chase frequently improvised without warning, even cutting scenes just because they didn't make him laugh. He refused to do scenes he didn't like, disrupting the shooting schedule and forcing the crew to work overtime due to his personal decisions. A technical crew member recalled, "He seemed like he didn't care about the movie but would fly into a rage if a line wasn't laughed at in the right place." But the lack of control doesn't stop there. Chase's treatment of the technical and behind-the-scenes crew also caused frustration among many. He berated the lighting crew for disrupting the emotional flow, complained to the makeup artist for spending too much time on Goldie, and treated assistants like personal servants. A witness recounted, "He once threw a prop just because the microphone accidentally came too close to his face. Do you agree that this attitude is unacceptable? If so, leave a 2 in the comments section. If not, comment a 5 to let me know. Don't forget to enjoy the video and hit subscribe to support the channel. I'll bring you even more fascinating stories in the future." Goldie Hawn's career hasn't always been a walk in the park. She's navigated the spotlight and the shadows, endured egos bigger than the set-calculated relationships and the silence that hurts. But she stood her ground, not by shouting to be heard, but by staying silent when needed, leaving gracefully, and continuing to shine in her own way. No need for power to retaliate, no need for scandal to gain attention, just time and resilience. The pressure weighing on Goldie Hawn is undeniable. Though renowned for her professionalism and ability to maintain composure in chaotic environments, even the strongest among us grow weary at times. Goldie did everything she could to maintain harmony, telling jokes during breaks, trying to diffuse tension whenever it escalated, and always finding ways to gently soothe Chevy Chase's unpredictable temper with kindness. But human endurance has its limits. A stylist overheard Goldie sighing to someone nearby. He's not funny when the cameras stop rolling. There's just bitterness. That remark, gentle yet loaded with meaning, spread quietly behind the scenes. For the crew, the woman they had always admired, the one who kept the set bright, was slowly breaking down. The relationship between the two leads grew increasingly toxic as the film entered its final weeks of shooting. Chase not only interrupted Goldie during scenes, but also publicly criticized the script, demanding changes to the dialogue to get the comedic punchline he wanted. He was no longer acting to make the film better, he was acting to keep the spotlight on himself. Goldie, who had always been positive and accommodating, gradually became distant. She chose to rehearse alone, limited her presence on set outside of filming hours, and remained silent in the face of gossip. An assistant recalls her saying, "I'm not weak. I just don't want to be humiliated for taking my job seriously." For someone known for her optimism and joy, this experience felt like a prolonged, emotionally draining gray cloud. The atmosphere on set changed dramatically. The jokes disappeared, the shoots became heavy, and the staff no longer wanted to linger after hours. Everyone just wanted the last day of shooting to come quickly. Meanwhile, Chevy seemed unfazed, even seeming to enjoy the chaos he had created. The image of the difficult genius he brought with him from SNL was now confirmed more clearly than ever. A lighting technician bitterly remarked, "He's not a genius. He's just a bully who knows how to time things right." Despite the chaos behind the scenes, Foul Play became a box office hit. The film was loved by audiences, praised by critics, and Goldie continued to establish herself as a strong and graceful feminist icon. But when studios suggested a sequel or a reunion of the on-screen duo, Goldie didn't hesitate. "I don't care," she simply told her agent. No matter how tempting the money was, she refused to work with Chevy Chase again. By the late 1980s, Goldie Hawn was no longer just a star, she had become a brand. With her signature smile, flowing blonde hair, and natural charm, she conquered every film genre from comedy to psychological drama. So when a promising comedy project came along with Bill Murray proposed as her co-star, everyone thought it was a dream pairing. Goldie, the sweetheart of America, and Murray, a spontaneous talent beloved for his unpredictable style. On paper, it was an ideal pairing, but in reality, it quickly turned into a storm that Goldie never wanted to experience again. Murray didn't read from the script. He discarded the lines, broke the rhythm of the film, and turned every scene into his own stage. The emotional, meaningful scenes were reduced to cheap jokes. He rolled his eyes, made exaggerated expressions, and even showed obvious boredom when it was Goldie's turn to speak. The screenwriters, who had spent a year writing the script, could only watch in silence. Goldie tried to keep up maintaining her smile and giving Murray space, but this improvisation was no longer creativity. It was subtle sabotage. The climax came when Goldie was performing an emotional scene. In the moment, she was trying to hold on to the film's depth. Murray turned with his characteristic indifferent expression and delivered a sarcastic remark in front of everyone. Why don't you try acting as if you've been in a drama before?" The room erupted in laughter, awkward, forced laughter. Some laughed out of concern, others because they didn't know what else to do. But Goldie didn't. She said nothing. She simply folded the script, gently stood up and walked out. No anger, no tears, just silence, heavy with meaning. And then she left the set, never to return. The next day, Goldie's representative called the producer immediately. No negotiations, no apologies, just a clear message: Goldie was out. This news never made it to the press. No rumors of conflict, no sensational headlines, just a decision to protect the peace of a strong woman. Behind the scenes, rumors still spread. Someone in the industry once said, "He thinks unpredictability is genius. I think it's exhausting." Another added, "Stay away from comedians who confuse disrespect with spontaneity." Murray's actions weren't just rude. They were part of a pattern Goldie was all too familiar with: smart men using charm to disrupt scripts, shoots, and female colleagues, and the women around them having to smooth over the consequences with a smile. There was no reconciliation, no heartwarming reunion interview after many years. The producers tried to reconcile them, as Goldie was still a big draw and Murray still had appeal. But Goldie wouldn't budge. She didn't provoke malicious interviews, she didn't complain. She simply refused to work with him anymore. As a close friend later shared, she didn't just close the door, she erased the whole house from the map. That experience became a turning point in Goldie's career. She began to say no, not in a timid, silent way, but with clarity and decisiveness. She refused scripts that had roles alongside unpleasant men. She withdrew from projects where she had to be the straight man in a chaotic game. From the late 1980s to the early 1990s, a clear shift in her role choices became evident. When asked why she no longer did many male-centric comedies, she simply smiled serenely and said, "I chose peace." She was invited to speak sitting near the head of the table, surrounded by supporters and empathetic individuals, safe and profound. But just a few tables away, Sean Penn sat like a bored king, gazing at the crowd. When Goldie took the stage with her heartfelt speech, Penn clearly showed his boredom, shaking his head dramatically, sighing loudly enough for everyone to hear, then leaning back as if watching a boring movie scene. One guest described him as sitting like a sulky teenager forced to listen to a lecture. Someone heard him mutter, "Another wellness lecture." A few people laughed awkwardly, most not knowing where to look. But even without those disapproving glances, the damage was already done before Goldie had said a word. Still, she delivered her speech in a steady voice, her message heartfelt, not demanding applause but seeking understanding. When it ended, there was a light round of applause, but then a voice rang out above all others. "You should just laugh." It was Penn. He nodded as if he had just played a prank, while some people stood up, others pretended not to hear. Goldie paused for a moment, smiled slightly, raised her champagne glass in a toast, and left the event shortly thereafter. Back home, according to her close friends, Goldie cried. Not out of embarrassment, but out of exhaustion. She said, My entire career, and I'm still labeled as the laughing girl by people who don't know what I stand for. It wasn't the first time she'd been belittled by a man. But Penn made old wounds flare up with Murray. She could tease with Penn. It was deliberate rejection. She felt herself being seen through a thin veil, smiling cute, not worth listening to. That night, Goldie made a firm decision: no joint interviews if Penn was mentioned, no appearing on stage together, no photos of the two of them at events. When asked about him in a magazine, she simply replied, "Not my energy." A few months later, among friends, she was more assertive: you can believe in your career without stepping on others' goals. For her, the incident wasn't just a conflict. It was a crack in her perception. Penn's dramatic, aggressive persona made Goldie see him as a cynical blade. He didn't just bring down one person. He brought down the entire worldview she represented. She never retaliated, made a public statement, or used the media to defend herself. She didn't need to. She left quietly, elegantly, and completely. And she never forgot. To this day, Goldie maintains a distance from Sean Penn, both emotionally and professionally. No hatred, but a clear, permanent, and unshakable silence. For Goldie, the betrayal didn't come from a sarcastic remark. It came from the reminder that despite time, success, and community work, there will always be rooms where men like Penn don't want to see her. This role promises to bring Goldie the seriousness, credibility, and influence that only projects associated with Dustin Hoffman can guarantee. On paper, it's an exciting combination: two Oscar-winning legends representing two completely different acting styles coming together to create a pinnacle of acting artistry. For Goldie, this could have been a major turning point in her career if everything had gone smoothly. However, from the moment filming began, there was something off about Hoffman's energy. Despite some concerns, Goldie gave her all to complete the role. But after just a few lines, Hoffman abruptly and rudely interrupted her. "You're not connected." The room fell silent. Everyone sat stiffly, eyebrows furrowed. Before Goldie could react, Hoffman turned to the producers, smiled sarcastically, and added, "You're still acting like you're in a sitcom." This was not an objective comment or professional feedback. It was a tactical jab packaged under the guise of intelligence. The producers laughed, but their laughter wasn't encouragement or support. It was filled with anxiety, tension, and a hint of complicity. Goldie stood frozen, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she immediately realized this was a deeper game. This wasn't a critique of her acting, but a public humiliation executed with the precision of surgery. What had once been an inspiring collaboration suddenly turned into a dissection, and Goldie became the patient on the operating table. She didn't cry, didn't storm off in anger, and didn't flinch. She refocused, completed the scene with a steady voice and unshaken hands. But deep inside, something had broken. Not her confidence or talent, but her willingness to endure such cruel treatment under the guise of art. She left the set not with tears, but with a firm decision. The next morning, Goldie officially withdrew from the role. No negotiations, no further discussions. She called her manager and said a line that would later become legendary among her close friends: "I will not fight to be respected by men who have already decided I'm just a joke." The role was given to someone else. Hoffman continued on her path, and the film industry barely batted an eye. However, behind the scenes, those who were present at the audition that day could never forget that moment. Hoffman didn't just give a weak performance, he also exposed a toxic truth. This wasn't acting, it was abuse of power. He wasn't refining a scene, he was asserting his dominance. This wasn't serious artistry, it was ego on a leash, and Goldie decided not to let it bite her. She not only refused the role, but also cut off any possibility of reconciliation. She publicly declared that she would never work with Dustin Hoffman again. And indeed, she never worked with him again. Years later, in a rare interview, Goldie told a reporter, "In this industry, there are men who forget that they are not the directors of the women around them." That was the clearest hint she had ever given. Those who knew the story immediately understood who she was referring to. For Goldie, that moment lingered not because she lost the role, but because in that instant she doubted her own instincts. For someone like Goldie, who built her career on intuition and the courage to break all the molds, that was the real betrayal. A close friend recalled that night Goldie came home, sat in silence, then wrote in her diary, "He tried to make me feel small. I won't let that happen." She took a different path in the industry, not out of resentment, but out of clarity of vision. She refused to be molded by others' definitions of legitimacy. Goldie no longer pursued recognition through heavy roles. Instead, she created her own definition of strength. She remains loyal to comedy films not because she can't play dramatic roles, but because she understands that her strength doesn't need to be cloaked in tragedy to be respected. When asked years later if she would return to dramatic roles, Goldie simply smiled. Her signature smile, tilted her head and said, "If the room fits." That was a subtle yet sharp response that said it all. Do you think Goldie is choosing the right path for herself? If so, leave a comment to share your thoughts. Don't forget to enjoy the video and hit subscribe to support me in creating even better content.